Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. Progress on a new Monroe County jail is moving at a snail's pace, in part because of friction among community leaders.
We want real justice reform. I think we need to start working collaboratively.
Coming up, the sheriff gives us a tour of the current jail facility and what he calls the inexcusable conditions. Bans on medical care for transgender youth are sailing through legislators across the country, including here in Indiana. Ahead, we break down Indiana's proposed ban and ask whether it protects children or denies them access to proven medical care. And you'll want to meet Hellen Guthrie.
How old are you, Helen?
Too old.
In honor of International Women's Day, we talked to this World War II veteran about her service in a Navy intelligence unit. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Everyone seems to agree that Monroe County needs a new jail, but officials can't agree on next steps in the process of building one. Lucas Gonzalez is here to explain where things stand and why leaders aren't on the same page.
Hi, Joe. Monroe County Sheriff Ruben Marte took us on a tour of the current facility in downtown Bloomington recently, and it definitely backed up the complaints that we've heard about the facility. Here's what we saw and what officials have to say about building a new one. Set foot in the Monroe County Jail, and one of the first things you'll notice is the smell. Though it's hard to describe, sewage comes to mind. The odor is just one of many problems at the jail, along with deteriorating infrastructure, flooded facilities, filthy common areas, and potentially deadly hazards, to name a few. Sheriff Ruben Marte is fully aware of the issues and wants others to be as well.
I'm obligated to provide a safe and clean environment for people that are in there, in the jail. And, you know, the conditions where I found the jail in, to me, was inexcusable, and I know we could do better than that.
Marte says his office is struggling to keep up, despite its best efforts. He has voiced those concerns to the Community Justice Response Committee, a group of county officials discussing building a new jail. The group's discussions are being led by county commissioners. Marte recognizes the need for a new jail, but says it's just as important to improve the existing one. The jail is in a better state today than it was in January, when Marte delivered a presentation to the committee detailing extreme filth and decay throughout the facility. Marte says there's still a long way to go, however. He says when inmates live in poor conditions, a ripple effect begins.
How can I bring in programs to help people in need where they're at right now if it's not clean? How can someone feel good about themselves and want to do better for themselves if the place is not sanitized and clean? When I'm told that is fixed, and I have people.
Marte is especially concerned about the laundry room, where leaking water sometimes gets dangerously close to exposed wires. A makeshift shield has been built to divert water away from the wires, but the room still floods.
There are certain things that need to be fixed that we cannot do on our own, that needs to be fixed. So when I mention support, I mean things that I cannot do on my own.
Specifically, Marte says he wants more help from the county commissioners. He laid bare his frustrations in a recent email in which he said he would continue his work with or without their support. Commissioner Penny Githens has pushed back against Marte's criticisms.
We are addressing the problems that A, we have been told about, and B, that we are responsible for.
Meanwhile, officials are operating under pressure from a lawsuit by the ACLU. Ken Falk, the legal director of the ACLU of Indiana, sued Monroe County in 2008, charging constitutional violations due to overcrowding at the jail. That part has been addressed as part of a settlement agreement between the county and the ACLU. The lawsuit has not been officially dismissed, however, as the deadline keeps getting extended. For now, Githens says the county must demonstrate progress to the ACLU before the next deadline in January 2024. But not everyone is supportive of the effort to build a new jail, including Max Smith, a former inmate. Smith spent years incarcerated, including at the Monroe County Jail, for drug possession and related charges.
So for me, it was a life-changing thing because my freedom being taken away was something I had not experienced before. It was a pretty horrible experience, actually, all of it.
Today, Smith works as a general contractor and oversees the construction of cooperative living spaces in Bloomington. He says many incarcerated people struggle with mental health and substance abuse, and that jailing them is not a solution.
Locking them up is, to me, the worst thing that we can do. And so to build another facility to do that, it seems like it's just the most ridiculous thing in the world.
Many addicts relapse even after serving time, Smith says. He credits his rehabilitation primarily to New Leaf, New Life, a local nonprofit that supports current and former inmates in Monroe County. New Leaf offers programs focused on substance abuse, life skills, and educational therapy, all to help individuals have successful lives after incarceration. Smith says the program changed his life and hopes to see it continued if a new jail is built.
I don't know what Monroe County Jail was like prior to me going there or to New Leaf being in there, but it is a more humane place, I think, partly because of the community's involvement there.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Lucas Gonzalez. We reached out to former Monroe County Sheriff Brad Swain for comment. He says the jail has been deteriorating for some time and must be replaced, but he is satisfied with the progress made under his administration.
So this process, moving the jail forward, is stalled in committee. What's going on?
It's been going on for a while. The reason that it's stalled is that people just basically have different ideas about how they should move it forward. So the county commissioners, they think that they should split up into subgroups. There were 4 or 5 different ones, I believe, and for example, Deputy Prosecutor April Wilson felt like there was sort of a lack of collaboration within that committee. So here's what she had to say about that.
I think we're all here in good faith to learn more information to make the system better. So if we want real justice reform, I think we need to start working collaboratively.
There's been contention among the Community Justice Response Committee there too, right?
Yeah, that's something that you've seen a lot of in recent CJRC, Community Justice Response Committee meetings. So for example, this past week, Commissioner Penny Githens, she kind of went toe-to-toe with Wilson, who we just heard from. There was one point in the meeting at which Wilson was trying to basically defer her time to some of her other colleagues on the committee. Githens took that personally. It's worth noting that this isn't something that is exclusive to just that one meeting. It's not like it was just an isolated incident. It's sort of just reflective of the nature of these talks, these committee conversations. So here's Nicole Bolden, actually. She took issue with the fact that Ruben Marte and Jennifer Crosley, county councilwoman, have been sort of targeted by the commissioner's comments.
While I hope that it is not the intent of those engaging in this behavior to indicate any bias, the fact remains that the only 2 elected officials of color in this room have been treated to a high level of disrespect that does not track with the treatment of others in this room.
Okay, so now what's the next step? What happens now?
Yeah, so the commissioners have a recommendation for an architecture firm to create a master plan and build a new facility. They have not voted yet, so that'll come at their next meeting on March 22nd. In the meantime, there will be an upcoming CJRC meeting before that. We'll kind of just have to wait and see what they talk about then.
All right, Lucas, thanks so much for your reporting.
Thank you for having me.
We're joined now by Liz DeSantis for the latest headlines from around the state. Hi, Liz.
Hi, thanks, Joe. Tests show waste imported to Indiana from the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment does not contain harmful levels of dioxins. Governor Eric Holcomb hired a third-party lab to conduct the tests. The results show dioxin levels within what the EPA considers an acceptable range. The contaminated soil is being sent to the Heritage landfill in Rochdale. Despite objections from some Hoosiers, the state says it doesn't have the authority to prevent facilities from accepting materials they're permitted to dispose. The governor's office says all loads coming to Rochdale will continue to be tested. Hoosiers who get federal assistance to help pay their electric and gas bills may face shutoffs after this coming Wednesday. That's when the winter moratorium on utility disconnections ends. The moratorium only applies to people who either receive help through the Energy Assistance Program or if a local EAP office notifies the person's utility that they qualify. Of the 5 major Indiana electric utilities, more than 19,000 households had bills that were past due in December and were eligible for the assistance. More than 54,000 Hoosier households were on payment plans. A new voluntary cost share program is available to landowners in the Lake Monroe watershed. The goal is to reduce soil erosion and water pollution. Clayton Baumgarth has the story.
Friends of Lake Monroe will fund up to 75% of the cost, to a maximum of $10,000, to implement practices like planting cover crops, fencing livestock out of streams, and more. Lake Monroe Watershed Coordinator Maggie Sullivan says the program will directly fund a finite amount of watershed residents.
In terms of how many people will actually participate in the program, if we can get 30 or 40, that would be great. In terms of how many people we reach with education, we're hoping that number is a lot bigger, in the hundreds and the thousands.
The program is part of the 2022 Lake Monroe Watershed Management Plan, which aims to reduce the amount of sediment, nutrients, and fecal contamination reaching the lake by pursuing multiple projects across the watershed. The cost share program will work primarily with farmers to address fecal and foreign material contamination.
It's primarily farmers, since we know that farmers are actively tilling the soil, they're actively putting down fertilizer, or they have animals that are putting down manure, and those are things that we really want to make sure don't get into the water.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Clayton Baumgarth.
Interested landowners can learn more at the Friends of Lake Monroe website. The initial application deadline is June 1st, 2023, with funds being awarded as a reimbursement after work is completed. Bloomington's mayor wants the city council to consider making a portion of Old State Road 37 that runs through Lower Cascades Park pedestrian only. Mayor John Hamilton wants to get the matter before the council later this year.
For Mayor Hamilton, who's always been a proponent of this project, recognizes that there's been opinions on both sides about whether to open it or to close it.
Hamilton's request goes against a 2021 recommendation by the Park Commission to reopen the road for motorists following a 15-month pilot study to examine the effects of temporarily restricting it. The recommendation was driven by input from residents with mobility challenges who said the closure limited their access to the park. Wheeler Mission in Bloomington has opened a new space adjacent to its property on Westplex Avenue. As Benta Boutier reports, the expansion does not increase its 116-bed capacity, but it adds space for more social services and outside agencies.
Bloomington Wheeler's Shelter for Men has a new building. It provides 24-hour low-barrier shelter with 84 beds, showers, and a living room. The original shelter next door will keep 32 beds for long-term shelter and will expand services. Bloomington Director Dana Jones says the group can now add an on-site facility for HealthNet, which provides medical care twice a week at Wheeler. HealthNet previously was known as Volunteers in Medicine. It also adds office space for other service providers.
By renovating the Center for Men, we now will be able to provide additional services for those experiencing homelessness through interagency work.
Several nearby businesses voiced concern when Wheeler bought the building in 2021. Jones says he's worked with them and the city to handle future issues.
The city installed a fence in one little area for one of our business owners and got pretty actively engaged in helping out here. The police department started running some additional patrols.
The goal of expanding space for social services is to decrease client time in shelters. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Benta Boutier.
IU announced last week that local recording artist John Mellencamp is donating his personal artifacts and memorabilia from his nearly half-century-long career to the university. Molly Murphy has this report.
John Mellencamp famously sang about growing up in the small town of Seymour, and he spent most of his adult life living in Bloomington. So the 71-year-old rocker says it doesn't feel right to house his archives anywhere else.
It shouldn't be any other place than here, because this is where I've lived my entire life. I always come back here, and I am a Hoosier.
The collection will include his creative works, photographs, instruments, and other significant memorabilia.
It's not so much as like, oh, look, there's the original writing of a small town. It's more than that. I want it to be like a learning center.
IU President Pamela Whitten also announced a statue of Mellencamp will be built next to the IU Auditorium, and his paintings will be exhibited at the Eskenazi Museum of Art in 2024. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Molly Murphy.
And Joe, there should be a lot of Mellencamp memorabilia from his career. He's released 23 studio albums and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2008.
Thank you, Lizzie. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. We'll discuss the number of anti-LGBTQ bills making their way through the State House, including one that bans gender-affirming care. And we talk with a World War II veteran about her time in the Navy as she looks forward to her 106th birthday this spring. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Life is full of choices, and right now your favorite member benefit, Passport, is offering more choices for you to stream.
Welcome to the club.
It's a beautiful thing. With cooking.
I gotta let it cook, but I keep wanting to smell it.
Travel.
And here we are.
Oh, yeah!
Documentaries.
I realized I could change the world.
And so much more. The choice is yours with Passport on the PBS Video app.
We care about things that affect the lives of every American.
We are there at the front line
to get to the heart of what really matters in every issue.
This country has not seen this in 80 years.
This extraordinary moment in American history.
You're making such a huge impact.
Trust is at the heart of what we do.
Welcome back to Indiana News Desk. Indiana lawmakers filed about 24 anti-LGBTQ bills this legislative session, tripling previous years. The slate of anti-LGBTQ legislation largely follows a similar trend nationwide. There have been more than 350 anti-LGBTQ bills filed so far across the country. Bills filed in Indiana fall into four main categories: education, gender-affirming care bans, parental rights, and identity documents, mirroring what is being proposed in red states across the country. We're joined now by Indiana Public Broadcasting's Lauren Chapman for more on the bills making their way through the State House. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Thanks so much for having me, Joe.
So, a couple of the bills moving forward deal with gender-affirming care for transgender youth. What do legislators want to accomplish here?
Yeah, so first, it's really important to understand what gender-affirming care is. It covers social, mental, medicinal, and surgical care for the treatment of gender dysphoria, though it's also really important to note that not all transgender people experience gender dysphoria. It's also important to note that mental health professionals, psychiatrists, etc., recognize this stress as clinically significant, so its treatment is also very, very important. So there are two bills that are moving forward. The first one doesn't actually have to do with transgender teens. This is a bill that would basically limit what the Department of Correction would be able to provide. It originally was very similar to the one for transgender teens, where it banned medicinal and surgical treatment for incarcerated transgender Hoosiers. However, the medicinal ban was dropped because of concerns about cruel and unusual punishment, which takes us to the ban on gender-affirming care for transgender teens. The bill itself bans a number of treatments, surgeries, etc., but specifically only if the person has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Lawmakers, one of the misconceptions that lawmakers have pointed to is the concern that teens and children in Indiana are receiving gender-affirming surgeries. That goes against national and international guidance, and providers that testified and that I've talked to both in Indiana and nationwide simply don't provide that treatment in Indiana. The other aspect is, of course, that medicinal component, which specifically targets puberty blockers and hormone therapy. Lawmakers have been pointing to safety concerns with puberty blockers, which simply aren't backed up by any science or study. Puberty blockers just allow people to put a pause on puberty before experiencing it. And so lawmakers have kind of pointed to this creates inequality for transgender youth because the bill allows all of those treatments as long as the person hasn't been diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Democratic Senate leader Greg Taylor, called into question why that was.
Are you really trying to protect children? Or are you actually trying to demonize children?
Lauren, we just have under 30 seconds left, but who's pushing for this legislation?
This is part of a large national push that is being done by a lot of different organizations. The Alliance Defending Freedom has testified on the vast majority of anti-trans bills currently being heard at the State House, and they are a nationally recognized hate group that has advocated for the forced sterilization of transgender Europeans.
All right, Lauren, thank you so much for your reporting. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Doctors reported increased reports of burn injuries among children during the pandemic. The number of scald injuries led to awareness efforts last month. WTIU reports on one high school student who was treated for scalds, shared her story.
Bloomington High School North freshman Sarah Bueller spent 13 days in the Riley Children's Burn Unit in June 2021 after being scalded while making macaroni and cheese. She had burns on her upper back and torso and had to have 2 different skin grafting surgeries. Bueller swims for Bloomington High School North and has swum since she was 8, but she had to stay out of the water for 3 months after surgery.
It felt, while being weird, it felt kind of freeing to be back in the water and be back in my element.
She didn't know a lot about burns before and wants people to be aware of ways to prevent them. Medical director for IU Health's burn units, Brett Hartman, says they treated 60 inpatients and 180 outpatients for scalds last year in the pediatric burn unit.
And the other thing, always turn your pot handles to the inside so kids can't reach up and grab them or they get bumped and spill.
Last month was the state swim meet. Bueller didn't get to compete this time around, but has her eyes set on next year.
Recovery can be really long, depending on what type of burn, but just know that you're very brave and you're going to make it through this.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ben Taboutier.
And in recognition of International Women's Day this week, we're bringing you the story of a World War II veteran from Spencer. In 1943, Hellen Guthrie enlisted in the Navy, and now at 105 years old, she calls her time in the service the best years of her life. Sarah Whitmire reports.
Pictures sitting on every table, shelf, and mantel in Hellen Guthrie's house show proof of a life well lived. In the summer of 1945, Guthrie was sitting on the front steps of her grandparents' house when a couple Navy recruiters approached.
And then they started in, well, what you need to do is join the Navy. I said, I'm not doing anything. I might as well join the Navy.
Guthrie left home for the first time and went to Hunter College in the Bronx for indoctrination. From there, she went to Yeoman School at Oklahoma University. Guthrie says they chose the top 40 students from her class to form a new intelligence unit called Specialist Q.
Everybody would say to me, oh, what in the world is a Specialist Q? And I say, now you tell people. Specialist Q is a person who works with codes and ciphers.
She worked in a secured building in Washington, D.C. Her service lasted 28 months. In 1947, Guthrie married an Army veteran named Ralph. The couple moved to Irvington and had one child named Jean. Guthrie lives with Jean now in his home on the south side of Indianapolis. Minus having trouble with her vision, Guthrie's healthy. She's active in her church and the local VA.
When I go for to my doctor, she always says, you're perfectly healthy. I'll see you in 6 months.
Guthrie will turn 106 next month.
It's just a human nature that you're going to go as long as you can.
Her advice to others, particularly young people?
Enjoy life.
Just as Guthrie says she always has. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sarah Whitmire.
Now, Hellen was born in 1917, and if you want to think about how things have changed over her lifetime, consider this. In 1917, gas was 15 cents a gallon, loaf of bread 7 cents, the average price of a car was $400, and the average price of a home was just $5,000. Well, the NCAA will announce its fields for the men's and women's basketball tournaments this Sunday. The IU women are expected to receive one of the top 4 seeds after finishing the season 27-3 and winning their first Big Ten championship since 1983. Now, Indiana's men, who tied for second in the Big Ten, are predicted to be a 4th seed. The men's tournament begins on Tuesday and the women's on Wednesday with play-in games. That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend, and it's time to spring forward, so don't forget to set your clocks ahead 1 hour Saturday night.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.